Hello everyone, it's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I learned about how Aptera is planning to approach production and what my impressions of that are. Now again, I want to start this video with a caveat that I am not part of Aptera. I'm just a huge fan, an investor, and a reservation holder. So what I'm saying now are just my impressions after the visit. They may be completely wrong. And a lot of it is pure speculation on my part. You should not hold Aptera to anything that I say. They are not responsible for anything I say. This is just my personal speculations and my personal beliefs about what's going to happen. But after the site visit and talking to Chris Anthony and Sarah Hardwick and the other people there, I kind of now finally have an understanding of how they plan on approaching production of the Aptera. Before, it was a little unclear how much that they were planning on doing in their factory. I did not know whether they were going to do the composite body themselves, or do any of the metal work themselves, or any of the trim, or what exactly was going to happen in their production facility. But after the visit, it became very clear to me that what they're planning on doing is getting most of the manufacturing done off-site by their suppliers. So there's a couple of ways of doing it. One way is to be very vertically integrated, and that's what Tesla has moved to. Where you build your own batteries, you stamp your own metal, you have like the giga presses and things like that, and you just do as much as you can on your own. There's many advantages to that, and that is like you can control your supply chain better. You can control the quality of the parts better because you are making the parts, and you can maximize your own profits because people are not taking. Each supplier needs to make a little profit. So if you're your own supplier, you can preserve most of your profits. However, you need a ton of capital to be vertically integrated. You need a lot of capital, and Aptera does not have that kind of capital. Nothing even remotely close to that. So I was thinking about it, and of course, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a manufacturing expert. Never manufactured everything in my life. Never started a company in my life. But I was just thinking through that. In order to do that, that would take a lot of work. If they were gonna, like, let's say they were gonna source the headlights from one place and the buttons from another place, and all these little individual parts from like hundreds of different suppliers, and then they were going to put it together. I kind of thought that's where they were headed, but actually after talking to them, it sounds like what they're doing is the vast majority of the parts are going to come to them basically done in big subsystems. And Chris basically said there's 6 subsystems. And what they're going to be is there's going to be like a suspension subsystem, and so the entire like front end suspension mechanical stuff is going to come from one supplier, as well as the rear. So all the suspension and kind of that kind of stuff is going to come together. I think Alafe is going to what I don't know is Alafe going to send them the motors, and then they just install the motors on the suspension system and do up the wiring, or is Alafe going to send the hub motors to the people that are making the suspension? They install it, and then they send the entire subsystem over to Aptera. But in any case, basically they're not doing much of the production at their production site. At their production site, they're just kind of assembling the thing. They're like gluing the body parts together, then putting in the suspension subsystem, then putting in the battery subsystem, then putting in the interior trim, and the dash, and that kind of the infotainment system, and then the door hinges and the doors are come from another place. So they're just basically bolting the thing together, and then I think wrapping it or painting it or whatever they end up planning on doing. And I don't know if they're installing the solar panels themselves, or if the solar panels are going to be pre-installed by the people that are supplying them the body panels. So there are many advantages to the way that they're doing it, and the advantages are it takes much less capital to do it that way, because they don't have to get tooling, and they don't have to get all the equipment that they need to produce those things, they'll have suppliers that are doing that thing. And also, it takes very little manpower to assemble the thing, so it takes less manpower. And of course, human resources is probably the most expensive part of any company. And then they can outsource the manufacturing expertise to their suppliers. So they can ramp up very quickly and assemble cars fairly quickly this way. The downside is, of course, they are very dependent on their suppliers. If their suppliers cannot supply the part, like, if they don't have, if they're missing like a button or something, they can maybe get around that, or they can find secondary suppliers for it. But I think with big subsystems like this, they're not going to have like backup suppliers. That's my guess. I think they're going to have a single supplier, because no one's going to want to be a backup supplier for such a thing that only goes for Aptera. They have like one client for it. So I think they're going to have a single supplier for all those things. So they're very dependent on their suppliers. And so if their suppliers don't pull through, they're kind of dead in the water. But because of their capital resources, I think they have to do it that way. And I think it's a really smart way of doing it. And one of the things I picked up is, I was wondering, why are they trying to do more marketing and get more reservations at the point when they're kind of going to be supply limited, not demand limited. They can't make these things fast enough. However, I see what they're planning on doing, I think, is if they get large reservation numbers and show a lot of interest, then when they go IPO, then they can raise a lot of capital, and then they can go to their suppliers and say, hey, you know what? We don't need 1,000 parts of this. We need like 10,000 parts of this. You guys need to tool up to provide us like 10,000 of these things at a time. And so they need a lot of capital. Like, the suppliers have to see that Aptera has the funds to pay them for 10,000 parts at a time. So I think that's what they're doing, is they're trying to find enough money so they can go back to their suppliers and say, hey, you know what? Initially, we were thinking we need 1,000 of these parts at a time. We're going to need 10,000 of these parts at a time. Or maybe they said they were going to need hundreds at a time, but now they need thousands at a time. Something like that. Anyway, they want to scale up faster. And if they scale up faster, then we'll get our Apteras better. So the way that they're approaching this thing, by having large subsystems outsourced to suppliers, I think is a really smart move. And so that is, of course, a big difference from the gigafactories that Tesla runs. I thought this drone video of the Giga Berlin was amazing. So I'm just going to let it run in the background while we're talking about this. But you can see, like, Tesla just builds everything on their own. They're even thinking about setting up their own lithium mine, so they can even be the source for the raw materials. But see, they just do their own metal work. They just make a bunch of their stuff in-house, which I suspect that the plan for Aptera, and this is complete speculation at this point, is after they deliver their first several years of cars and they become profitable and they raise enough capital, they'll start vertically integrating. They'll start bringing stuff in-house. They'll start bringing like the composite body in-house. They'll start bringing the suspension building in-house, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the stuff, they will bring in the stuff that is fairly simple to do. They will probably bring in-house, like the interior trim, that kind of stuff. I suspect the hub motors like will stay with Alafe, because that's very technical, and they don't want to recapitulate things that are technically difficult to do, but relatively simple things like the body work, maybe the suspension, maybe the door assemblies, maybe the interior trim. They're going to start bringing that stuff in-house and become more vertically integrated as they raise capital. But for the first several years, their plan is to have suppliers that they depend on, that supply large portions of the assemblies, like the door assembly, the interior assembly, the suspension assembly, the battery assembly. All of that stuff's going to be built off-site and just shipped to them, and they just kind of bolt them and glue them together and just assemble them. And that's why when you're just doing that, you don't need a lot of technical know-how. So that's how they can make micro factories in multiple locations throughout the world. So they will have one in San Diego at first, then they'll probably have several sites outside of California in the United States, and they'll probably maybe build one in Europe and Australia and other places that have them. And you can see how it would be easy to assemble. That also makes it easier for people to work on the cars because it doesn't take any robotics. Things aren't like super heavy. People can install them themselves with relatively little tool work. And that makes the repair of the Aptera easier as well. So anyways, after hearing that, I'm much more convinced that their pathway to ramping up production quickly is better as long as their suppliers are reliable. And that's, I think, the most important thing is finding reliable suppliers. And that I get the impression that that's what Chris Anthony has been doing this whole time is just trying to find good suppliers, and they're hammering out the engineering details right now. The suspension is pretty much tweaked, so he can tell the suppliers that, hey, this the suspension is, you guys can start tooling up to make this suspension because we've finalized that. The other things, they're final, like I think the body panels are probably finalized as well, so they're gonna figure that out. And then they're figuring out the battery packs, they're figuring out the cooling system, those kinds of things. Once they have it set up, they can and they've locked down their suppliers that have agreed to help them. They can give them the specs and the prototype, and then the suppliers can tool up to make that. Uh, from what Chris Anthony told me, I don't know if it was on camera or off camera, he said that the suppliers that he approached were very enthusiastic with helping out. They really believe in the vision of Aptera and an efficient vehicle, and they're very excited. So that's good that you have excited partners. And as long as they have reliable suppliers, I think the bolting together and the assembly of the car is pretty straightforward. And I get the impression that they'll be able to ramp up. What's going to slow them down is a couple of things. If let's say, for example, they do not have they do not have the engineering finished, and they don't have the a production ready prototype by the end of the summer, then I don't think the suppliers will have enough time to tool up to provide them parts by the end of this year, because it's going to take the suppliers several months to tool up and get ready to provide them parts. And I think initially they're going to provide them a few parts, and I think that the initial paradigm models that come out will be the prototype, like kind of proofing parts that their suppliers give as they're ramping up production, and they're going to use those to assemble their first paradigm models. Then their suppliers are going to get better and faster at manufacturing, and then they're going to be able to, at first they're going to send them like one or two prototypes and say, okay, are these parts good? You guys like these? And they're like, yes, we're going to use them. And they'll start assembling their first paradigm models with those, and then they're going to gear up and send them more and more. And then when they get shipments of like hundreds of these sub-assemblies at a time, then they can start ramping production quickly. Hopefully their suppliers start delivering thousands at a time, and then that will probably saturate the Carlsbad manufacturing site, and they'll have to open other sites at that point. And that hopefully will be happening throughout 2023, and maybe they'll open their first their first of the secondary sites towards the end of 2023. It's a pretty aggressive timeline, and like I said, I think it'd be pretty amazing if they hit these timelines, but they did seem very confident about it, and it did seem like the suppliers were very eager to help out, and they were kind of enthusiastic partners in this endeavor, which I think is a great sign. So anyways, that was the impression I got about the production, which made me feel good about their prospects, and I thought the strategy was very sound. I'd also like to take this time to thank the sponsors of this page and the members. These are the members that have joined. I'm going to list off the 40 kilowatt and above members: Paul Rebarchik, Harry Hawk, Paul Evans, Jaron Harding, John Malcolm. Oh, I'm sorry, my friend. I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly. Adimchi Onyenadum? Onyenadum? Sorry about that. Don Desert, and I don't know who BB is, but he signed up for the 100 kilowatt level. Really appreciate all you guys' support, and those of you who cannot support by joining the channel. I appreciate your views and your comments and your likes and subscribing. You guys are what make this channel happen, so I appreciate all of that. Thank you. Oh, and everyone who's around San Diego this weekend, on Sunday, April 24th, they will be at the Earth Fair in Balboa Park in front of the San Diego Automotive Museum. So if you're there, that's your chance to meet the team, ask them questions, see the Alpha vehicle. So if you're in the area, I would definitely recommend going and checking that out. Let me know, join us on Discord, and let me know how those things are. I won't be able to make it because I have other things I need to do, but let us know how that goes. And thanks for watching, everyone.